Oh, I'm on. Okay. Are we also on the air? I'm getting a thumbs up from upstairs. Good. Okay. Well, it is 7 o'clock, so we should be on. Good to see everybody. Welcome to Gracepoint Lenten Study. As you see on the screen, and those of you at home, just to let you all know, my wife Vicki was hoping to be here with me to share in this. She really enjoyed our Advent study so much, and we both led that together and had a lot of fun doing that. And we've done studies before together and always enjoy that. And she was hoping to be here. Unfortunately, as I shared with a few folks, we just had our first pickleball game last Friday. We got Vicky surprised all of us, me and the boys, with pickleball paddles, and we went over to the courts and had a great time. And then we got home, and she went out into the driveway with the boys, and they were playing basketball, and where the driveway meets the street is a curb, and she didn't see that as she was playing, and so she rolled her ankle really badly, and it's all swollen and multicolored, and so she's on crutches and just kind of trying to ice and elevate and ibuprofen and all that. So anyway, she hopes to be with us at some point as she starts to heal. So anyway, you're stuck with me for now anyway. So but I'm glad you all are here and excited about this study. I love Andy Stanley's studies, and if you haven't watched him preach or done one of his studies before, he is a fast talker. He says a lot, and I love his sense of humor and I love his knowledge. But just be prepared; he is a fast talker. But you will enjoy him, and you'll enjoy this study a lot. So the study focuses. It's a 4-week study, as you may know, and it focuses on 4 different characters of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And so the first character tonight is going to be Caiaphas. So we'll be talking about Caiaphas. Andy will talk about Caiaphas, and we'll watch the video in a few minutes. It's about, I think, 20 minutes tonight. And so so we'll watch that in a few minutes, and then we'll come back and have some discussion. We have a few questions we'll kind of throw out and try to get a little discussion going, and we will be finished by 8 o'clock. Before we get to that, just try to have one little discussion question, and for those of you here and those of you at home watching, what do you hope to experience this Easter season? And as you think about that, how do you normally observe Easter? Do you normally observe Easter as a spiritual season, or is it a one-day celebration to you? You know, a lot of people, when they think of Easter, they jump right to Easter Sunday, and it's just about that one day. So when you celebrate Easter, the Easter season, is that a spiritual season, or is it a holiday, a one-day holiday to you, or is it both? When you think of Easter and the Easter season, how do you think of that? Hey, Dale. Lent. You think of Lent. Okay. So it's more than just one day to you, in other words? Is that what you're saying, Dale? Yes. So it's a whole season. Any other thoughts on that? How do you? Yeah. We build up to it. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of like Christmas. Advent is a spiritual season that builds up to the big day of Christmas, and Lent is a season that spiritually builds us up to Easter. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, Easter doesn't end on Easter Sunday. It's the beginning of the Easter season, right? I've had people in churches come up to me the Sunday after Easter or 2 Sundays after Easter, and why are we singing the day of resurrection? That was 2 weeks ago. No, no, that was just the beginning. Just like after Christmas, we're singing Christmas hymns, a Sunday or two afterward. How come we're still singing Christmas? Because it's the Christmas season. That we were in Advent, now we're in Christmas. We were in Lent, now we're in Easter. Yeah. So yeah, it goes beyond, definitely goes beyond that day, a season of Easter. Other thoughts? Thank you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole, all of it, it tells a story, and I wish that our sanctuary would be as crowded on, Monday, Thursday, and Ash Wednesday as it is on Easter Sunday, and Good Friday as it is on Easter Sunday, because it really is meant to be one whole experience, not chopped up worship services. So yeah, thank you for saying that. Good Friday is such an important day, and it really is supposed to, all of it together is one big celebration and observance, and it is the retelling of that story every year, and but people often don't get that, and on Palm Sunday they leave and they'll say, "See you next Sunday on Easter." But what do you hope to experience this Easter season? Draw closer to God. Mm-hmm. And that really is what Lent is about. Lent is about that sort of annual re-examining of our faith journey, and what do we need to do to be closer? What adjustments do we need to make to be closer to God and closer to Jesus? And yeah, I mean, to draw closer to God is a great hope to have during this Easter season. Yeah, good. Any others? Any other thoughts about what you hope to experience this Easter season? I love seeing all the green tonight. Boy, it's just been a day of it. I love it. Love it. Yeah, Dale. Uh, every morning is like Easter? Okay. Mm. Right. Supercharge. I like that. Easter is a supercharge of what you experience every day. I like that. That's great. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. We some of you were here today, and we had a funeral service here for Pat Phillips this afternoon in the sanctuary, and funerals are supposed to be mini Easters, believe it or not, because in the service of death and resurrection, or the funeral service, we are talking about, of course, resurrection, regardless of what season of the year it is, whether it's Advent, Christmas, Lent, whatever. Funerals are designed to be mini Easters, and that, to remind ourselves of the resurrection, and we did that today in the telling of the resurrection story, along with the telling of and celebrating of Pat's life. And what a celebration it was. Everybody was in green, just like you all are today now, and it was a celebration. There truly was. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and start the video. Like I said, it's about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a few more questions on the other side of discussion based on what Andy's going to share with us tonight.
Caiaphas was the high priest during the time of Jesus. He was the most powerful, most influential person in Jerusalem, in Judea, and what we would consider ancient Israel. He was the guy. He was the connecting point between the nation of Israel and Rome. He was the person that communicated with Pilate or whoever the leader in the Roman garrison was at whatever point he was in leadership. But even more significant than that, Caiaphas was part of a family, and it's hard to describe the significance of this. Caiaphas was part of a family that controlled the temple, the politics, the religion, and the power of the temple for 40 years because his father-in-law was a high priest and 5 of his brothers-in-law were high priests. So this was basically a dynasty. They had all the power, they had all the influence, and they had extraordinary wealth. There were amazing financial perks that came with being at the epicenter of Jewish religion in the first century because Jews all over the world paid what was called a temple tax. And the equivalent of millions upon millions of dollars flowed into this 32-acre piece of real estate known as the temple in the middle of Jerusalem. So Caiaphas not only had extraordinary power, he had extraordinary influence because he had extraordinary access to extraordinary wealth. And things went along just fine for Caiaphas, the high priest, until a carpenter turned rabbi stepped onto the pages of history. We know him as Jesus Josephson. When Jesus showed up, here's the thing, and this is why you should read the Bible, you should read the New Testament. When Jesus showed up, the problem was, Caiaphas has all this power, he's got all this wealth, all this influence, he's in the family that controls everything. When Jesus showed up, the problem with Jesus was the crowds. It wasn't his teaching. People taught all kind of crazy things. It was the crowds. Everywhere Jesus went, there were crowds. We know the story from growing up in church, most of us, of Jesus feeding the 5,000. There were 5,000 men. People say there were 10,000 people. Some people say that's hyperbole. There were only 5,000 or 2,000. It doesn't matter. Everywhere Jesus went, there were at least hundreds and often thousands of people. And this was a threat to Rome, and this was a threat to the Jewish system because crowds meant potential insurrection, crowds meant division, crowds potentially meant civil war, crowds meant that things may not go well, and they may not go well quickly if a crowd suddenly turned on the Jewish leaders or turned on the Roman garrison. So the Romans were concerned about the crowd, and Caiaphas and his posse were concerned about the crowd, but everywhere Jesus went, he drew huge crowds. And Caiaphas and his group, they never drew a crowd, except on festival days. And they knew that people weren't there to see them or hear them. They were simply there because it was a festival. And the other thing that was a problem in terms of Jesus and his relationship with Caiaphas was that when Jesus spoke, and when Jesus acted and behaved, he spoke with such extraordinary authority. People were just amazed by his authority. In fact, remember that story of Jesus going into the temple and turning over the tables and chasing off all the cows and letting the doves go and, kind of wreaking havoc there and with the money changers in the temple. When the religious leaders sent by Caiaphas approached Jesus, they did not say, "What do you think you're doing?" They asked the question that they knew they needed to ask. They said, "Who do you think you are?" Because Jesus acted, behaved, and spoke with such extraordinary authority. But the other problem with Jesus is Jesus was extraordinarily critical of the religious leaders. Now, if you want to know what a Jesus rant looks and sounds like, if you get your Bible later, not now, and turn to Matthew chapter 23, it is a rant. I mean, Jesus had no respect for the temple leaders. Jesus had no respect because of the corruption that had happened inside the temple system by the time he showed up in history. I mean, he was all about criticizing it. And in Matthew 23, it just goes on and on and on. And at the end of this rant against these religious leaders, including Caiaphas, the high priest, here's what he says. This kind of caps it all off. He says, "You snakes, you brood of," this is Jesus talking. I mean, you wouldn't let your kids talk like this, okay? "You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell?" In other words, he says to the religious leaders, the people that get up every day and try to be good, the people who are responsible for leading the people who, oversee the sacrificing of animals so that they can find atonement for their sin. He looks at, quote, the best people in the city and he says, "You are going to hell." So it's no wonder that Caiaphas had a little problem with Jesus, his authority, the crowds, and his criticism of everybody that Caiaphas worked with and potentially had respect for. That Jesus threatened the peace and Jesus personally threatened the peace keepers. Now, this builds and builds and builds throughout the Gospels. You got to read it. And finally, there's a final straw. And the final straw between Jesus and Caiaphas and the final straw between Jesus and the temple leaders was not something that Jesus said. It was something that Jesus did. It was not a conversation. It was not a confrontation. It was an act of compassion. Jesus raised someone from the dead, and not just anyone. He raised a very famous citizen of Bethany, in the city of Bethany. He raised who from the dead? That's right, Lazarus. This was the final straw. What was the pinnacle of his miracles? What was the most amazing thing possible? Because not only had Lazarus died, Lazarus had been what? Buried. That's right. These people in Bethany had been to the funeral, and the next thing you know, they were seeing Lazarus walking around. So this was like over the top, and I mean, the crowd just swelled and swelled and swelled. And they realized, the religious leaders, and Caiaphas in particular, realized that their strategy was failing. And their strategy up to that time was to try to discredit Jesus publicly. That's why when you read the Gospels, they're constantly asking Jesus all these trick questions. And every time they think they've got him, Jesus comes back with a snappy answer, and they look stupid, and the people are like, go Jesus, you know? And so because what they were trying to do, the point of those questions was to try to divide Jesus from the crowd. They wanted Jesus to lose the crowd, because once Jesus loses the crowd, he is no longer a threat to the peace that they had established with Rome. So, for example, after Lazarus had been raised from the dead, here's what John, who saw all of this, was an eyewitness of all of this, here's what John writes. He says this in John chapter 12. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. So this crowd of people that knew about this miracle, they're telling everybody in the vicinity. So many people, continues, many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So now you got a crowd and a bigger crowd and even a bigger crowd. And the Pharisees and the leaders of the temple are just throwing their hands up, and they're thinking, wow, where is this going? How is this ever going to end? So the Pharisees said to one another, see, this is getting us nowhere. And this was their strategy to try to discredit Jesus with the people by asking him all these tricky questions. It's getting us nowhere. Look how, and I love this. Look how the whole world has gone after him. Now, you need to know this. This is fast forward way ahead. In the book of Acts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, the book of Acts that tells us what happened in the church after Jesus was raised from the dead, the book of Acts tells us, Luke, who investigated all these things, Luke tells us that many, many priests and Pharisees later became followers of Jesus. That's how John has the inside track to all this information. Later on, when John is investigating and Luke's investigating, some of these priests that eventually followed Jesus and some of these Pharisees that eventually became followers of Jesus said, John, you can't believe this meeting. We were so frustrated no matter what we did, no matter what we said, no matter what we came up with. Jesus made us look like fools over and over and over. And so John writes this in his gospel. Then we said at one point in one of those meetings, look, the whole world has gone after him, and surely they laughed out loud, because little did they know, 2,000 years later, come on, a third. I mean, if they think their whole world went after Jesus in Judea, today a third of the world's population declares that Jesus is somebody special. A third of the world's population almost declares that Jesus is Lord. They had no idea what they were on the front end of. Immediately following Lazarus, the miracle of Lazarus coming back to life, there's another conversation. It went like this. John records it. He says, then, right after they found out that Lazarus had been raised from the dead, then the chief priest and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. Now, this means almost nothing to us, but let me tell you how significant this is. This is three different groups. There's a little bit of crossover. This is three different groups that did not get along. They didn't see eye to eye theologically. The Sadducees that were a part of this group, they didn't think there was such thing as a resurrection. The Pharisees, most of the Pharisees thought there was. They didn't get along politically. They didn't have the same idea about how Israel should relate to Rome. These three groups didn't get along. This would be like the House and the Senate, the Republicans and Democrats and the Supreme Court all coming together and agreeing on something. That's how significant this is, but that's how big of a threat they viewed Jesus to be. And so they said together in this meeting that John found out later about, what are we accomplishing? In other words, what are we doing? I mean, this is crazy. The harder we try, the bigger the crowds grow. What are we accomplishing, they asked. Here is this man performing many signs. If we, they're way overstepping their sense of authority and bounds. If we let him go on like this, as if they were the ones letting him go on like this, if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. To which we would say, yes, that's the point. They said, everyone will believe in him, and then what? Because in their heart of hearts, they knew. In their heart of hearts, they knew there was something about this they should pay attention to. In their heart of hearts, they knew that to resist Jesus was to resist God. But there was something, and this is where it gets really relevant and practical for all of us. There was something that was so important to them that to follow Jesus and to embrace this carpenter turned rabbi who claimed to be the Savior that eventually would claim to be the Savior of the world, to embrace Jesus as who Jesus claimed to be meant they would have to let go of something that was extraordinarily important to them, their power, their popularity, and in their case, their wealth. They knew what they needed to do, but it was just going to cost too much. They knew how they needed to respond, but the price was just too high. They continues, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come, and they will take away both our temple and our nation. If we don't do something, we are going to lose everything that is important to us. And there we are. Because when you decide to follow Jesus, it's going to cost you something. In fact, as a Christian, when you finally decide, or from season to season, when things come up that are more important to you than your relationship with God, every single time you decide to put Jesus front and center in your life, every time I choose to do that, it's going to cost you something. And there they are. What do we do with Jesus? Everybody's following Jesus. He raised a man from the dead. I mean, that's your first cue. Follow him. When someone can raise people from the dead, you just get in line and follow that person, okay? This is not rocket science, right? But come on. This don't be too critical. But what had become life to them, what had become the center of gravity for them personally, was so important and so precious, the thought of giving it up. They just couldn't do it. Then one of them, and now we're introduced to Caiaphas actually in the story. Then one of them, Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up and he said, because there's all this commotion, they're all arguing, what should we do? What should we do? How do we handle this? What's another trick question? How do we get the crowds? How do we divide the crowds? And finally, Caiaphas just has them all be quiet. He says, be silent. He says, you know nothing at all. None of you know anything. The priest, you don't know anything at all. Okay, the Sanhedrin, you don't know anything at all. You don't know anything at all. Here's what you don't understand. You do not realize that it would be better for you. You do not realize, group of powerful people, influential people, wealthy people, you do not realize it would be better for you that one man die. Forget all this trick question. Forget all this trying to separate the crowd from him. Forget all this trying to trip him up. It would be better for you that one man die. And then he realizes what he said. For the people. It would be better for the whole nation if one man die. Not for us. It's not about us, guys. No, it's not about us. It's for the people. This is all about the people. So then rather than that, the whole nation should perish. In other words, guys, this isn't complicated. If we get rid of one man, problem solved. If we get rid of one man, the nation is saved. If we get rid of this one guy, we are better. The nation is better off. Now, John is an old man when he's writing this, the Gospel of John. He's an old man. He's looking back. Many, many years have passed by since he experienced these events, and he's met these people, and he's had these incredible conversations. And John writes in his Gospel at this point, this is so powerful. He says, Caiaphas, did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation. Because John's got a grin on his face. It's like, wow, they had no idea what they were on the front end of. And not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together to make them one. And John is looking back and he's smiling and he's thinking, they plotted to destroy Jesus. They plotted to crucify Jesus. They plotted thinking they can put an end to this crazy Jesus movement. And little did they know that as they resisted him, they participated in the will of God. As they resisted Jesus, they actually facilitated the will of God as it would be demonstrated and carried out through the life and the death of Jesus. Because in the end, his death actually multiplied his influence. And that's why I said up front, at the end of the day, my life and your life, your life, your life, will ultimately illustrate the futility of resisting God. We will be illustrations of people who said yes, even though it cost me, or no, because it cost me. Yes, even though it cost me, or no, because it cost me too much. And in the end, we will each illustrate the futility of resisting God. And here's why: because you were not created for your glory. You were created for God's glory. And in the end, your life will in some way be a reflection of the truth and the glory of God. So John writes down, he just had to be grinning. And so from that day on, they plotted to, let's just say this word together, all of our campuses, to take his life. And John writes this and grinned. They thought they could take his life. They were way overestimating their ability, because a couple of chapters previously, Jesus had addressed this. Here's what Jesus said about taking his life. Here's what he said: the reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have, there's our word, authority. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. John must have grinned as they plotted to take the life of Jesus. Now, Caiaphas had a problem. You see, Rome would not execute anybody over a violation of Jewish law. If you violated a Jewish law, even if it demanded death, from the Old Testament, Rome ignored that part of the Jewish law. So he needed to come up with a charge that would give him an opportunity to take Jesus to Rome and say, hey, he hasn't just broken a Jewish law, he's broken a Roman law. In fact, he needed a charge of sedition, which meant he needed to be able to demonstrate to Pilate that Jesus was actually a threat, not simply to the Jewish peace or the Roman peace, but the Roman Empire. And Jesus had claimed to be and would claim to be a king. And that's all Caiaphas needed. And so he pegged Jesus with the charge of sedition because he claimed to be a king. And he had Jesus crucified. The threat was eliminated. Their position in the nation and the city was secure. And then just as the sun rose on the first day of the week after Passover, there was a commotion outside of Caiaphas' home. And he heard someone running down the hall. And they threw open his door. And they said, "Sir, the body of the Jewish rabbi who we crucified is missing." What do you mean missing? A few days later, there would be reports of Jesus sightings all around the vicinity. A few weeks later, Jesus' closest followers would come out of hiding, and they would walk into the streets of Jerusalem, and they would say, "You crucified him. God raised him. We've seen him. Say you're sorry." And suddenly there were crowds and crowds and crowds of people. Now they aren't rallying around the person of Jesus. They're rallying around the name of Jesus, the reputation of Jesus, and the resurrection of Jesus. And Caiaphas and his cronies realized he's done more in his dying than he did in his living. And we were not able to take his life. And years later, Caiaphas lost his place. And years later, the Jewish people lost their temple. And as would happen time after time after time after time, those who would attempt to stand against and thwart the will of God simply became footnotes in the story of Jesus. And Caiaphas, Joseph Caiaphas, Jewish high priest, became a footnote in the story of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, what does that have to do with you and me? Everything. Because there's a little Caiaphas in all of us. There's a little Caiaphas in me that says preserve at all cost. Preserve reputation. Preserve that relationship that you know you should not be in, but it means so much to you right now. You would do anything to preserve it, and you find yourself thinking, God, either help me or get out of my way. Either help me get this right and keep this front and center, or get out of my way, don't bother me. Whatever it is that's in the center of your life, this is the thing that has replaced God in your life. A position, a GPA, that even if you have to cheat, you will not allow your GPA to suffer. There's something in all of us that says preserve, 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 preserve. But I want you to hear one thing, and if you haven't been paying attention, tune back in. And if you're on 2 or 3 screens at home, I want you to tune back in because this is really important. Okay, look up here. Whatever you have replaced God with in your life, whatever you have replaced God with in your life, whatever you have placed in the center of your life other than God, or if you're Christian, other than following Jesus as your Lord, whatever you have replaced God with in your life is already diminishing in value and significance. I can prove it to you. You see, your greatest regrets and my greatest regrets, your greatest regrets and my greatest regrets, your greatest regrets are connected to your attempts to preserve something that isn't even a part of your life anymore. Think about that. Your greatest regrets were an attempt to preserve something or someone that's not even a part of your life anymore. That thing, that relationship, that person was losing significance even as you clung tightly.
So I want to start with something that Andy says in the video. He says, when you decide to follow Jesus, it will cost you something. When you decide to follow Jesus, it will cost you something. He goes on to say, in fact, as a Christian, every single time you decide to put Jesus front and center in your life, it will cost you something. What does it cost? What does it cost people? Power? Okay. Time. When you decide to follow Jesus, it will cost you something. What does it cost you? What does it cost you personally every time you decide to follow Jesus? What does it cost others when they decide to follow Jesus? Maybe power, maybe time. What else does it cost? Say that again. For some people, friendships, right? You had friends that like to live their lives a certain way, and now you're following Christ, and maybe you're calling them out on a few things. Or not, you're just trying to be a better disciple, and maybe now you're not as fun. And maybe you don't get the calls to come socialize that you used to get. Yeah, it could cost you friendships. It can cost you ambition, right? Because we're taught when we follow Christ that we put away things like the desire for power or certain ambitions in the world in place of humility, discipleship, and servanthood. Yeah, ambition. What else? I've decided to follow Jesus Christ, and that means something. It means a different lifestyle. It means a different set of values. It means making tough decisions sometimes. It means perhaps not living my life the way that I want to always. And so, based on those things, what can that cost me? What would I... Yes, Yes, that's a big one. Yeah. Giving up a sin that you enjoy. I don't want to give that up. I like that. It's fun. But I want to follow Jesus. But I don't want to give that up. Yeah. I mean, that's a good one. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So we can also, it can also cost us things that we don't like holding a grudge. What else? I'm sorry, what was the other? You said hold. Yeah. Yeah. Grudge is holding you back. But like Martha said, that might be, for some of us, that might be one of those sins that we like holding grudges. For some of us, I like holding a grudge. Makes me feel, yeah, right. Um, yeah. What else? Might cost us some of our ego and our control. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we live in that kind of society, and we like to be in control of everything. We like to be in control of our lives, and now suddenly I'm following Jesus, so I'm not really totally in control, right? Because I'm taught that I have to turn it over to Jesus and follow Jesus and Jesus' direction for my life, and yeah, that's hard. So that's going to cost me a little bit of that control and cost me a little bit of my ego in the process as I try to be more humble. Yeah, it does. It does cost us something when we decide to follow Jesus. What what um, what is intimidating about the idea that God's will cannot be thwarted? What is intimidating about that statement? God's will cannot be thwarted. How is that intimidating? Keep thinking about that. How is that comforting? You cannot thwart God's will. God's will be done. How is that comforting?
I think the comforting part is
God's got you covered.
uncomforting part is I'm not as much in control.
Right. Right. No, I think that is very comforting. God's got my back. God is in charge, and I'm good. I'm happy about that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. God is on your side. Yeah. That is comforting. When you think about God's will cannot be thwarted, that's reassuring to me to know that God has my back and that God is in charge. That we can't what? We can't mess it up too much, right? Because God's in charge. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. But what's intimidating about that, though? Or frustrating? How about what's frustrating about that? Might not match our will. I might not get what I want, and that's frustrating. When I don't get what I want, that's frustrating. And it might not be, yes, especially when it comes to our prayer life. How many of you have prayed for something and you expected an answer this day, this week, this month, and you didn't get it because it's God's time's not your time. That you've had that happen. I don't have to ask for a show of hands. We've all had that happen. It's frustrating, right? Yeah. Yes. Especially some of the things we've been watching on TV recently, right? Yes, it is very hard sometimes when, we talk about God's in charge and God's will is going to be done. And, but that is frustrating at times when we see the things that we see, especially right now going on in the world in Ukraine, and we turn on the news and we see some of the footage that they show or some of the images that they show, and we think, that's frustrating. How is God in control and what of all of this? That is sometimes hard for us to wrap our minds around because we want God to intervene, perhaps. And that is frustrating. And we think to ourselves, that cannot be God's will. And where is God in all of this? What's God doing? Right. Yeah, we do have free will, that's true. And so, because of free will, a lot of imperfect things happen. Yeah. But it's a good point. That is frustrating when we talk about God's will and God being in charge and in control, and then it's frustrating at times when we see the things we see. How many of you saw President Zelensky's address to Congress yesterday in the video? Did you see the video they showed? And heartbreaking images that they showed. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, there are plenty of things going on in our lives and in our world that we struggle with when we think about God being in control or in charge and God's will. Andy talks in the video about, of course, we're talking about Caiaphas, and he talks about Caiaphas and Caiaphas's family being in charge of the temple. I mean, for generations, for like 40 years, someone in his family was a high priest. It was not just Caiaphas, but it was Caiaphas and his father-in-law and 5 of his brothers-in-laws. 5 of his brothers-in-law were high priests. So for 40 years they controlled the temple, and then this carpenter, this rabbi, Jesus comes along and is just frustrating Caiaphas, and he talks about the final straw for Caiaphas in all of this was what? When he raised Lazarus, from the dead. And so I want to just read those verses because perhaps we haven't read the story of Lazarus in a while. But so from John's Gospel, Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and we read in the 11th chapter, verses 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," Jesus said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." And Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." What do specifically verses 41 and 42, what do they say about the intent of Jesus in raising Lazarus from the dead? What do you think these verses say would be Jesus' intent in raising Lazarus? 41 and 42 say, "So they took away the stone, and then Jesus looked up and said, 'Father, I thank you that you've heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me.'" What was Jesus' intent in those verses? What do those verses say about his intent in raising Lazarus from the dead? It's not me, it's God. Jesus really struggling tonight. It's been a long day. Jesus doesn't raise Lazarus from the dead for his own selfish reasons, right? Jesus wept about the death of Lazarus. Jesus was sad, but Jesus doesn't go there and raise Lazarus because he's heartbroken and misses his friend and simply wants him back and he's being selfish. It's about God. And those verses tell us that. Because they say, I knew that you hear me. I know that you always hear me. But I say these words so that those here will hear me and will believe. So Jesus' intent is, in raising Lazarus, is what? To what? Say it louder, I'm sorry. Son of God, power of God, so that others will believe that he's the Son of God, so that others will believe in God and that God does have the power that Jesus is trying to tell them that God has. Right. Yeah. Do you think that in doing that Jesus had an idea that might complicate things for him, to put it mildly? Do you think that he understood that might increase his conflict with the religious leaders, that they might have a problem with that? So why is it important that Jesus doesn't avoid these things? He knew that would cause a problem with all the religious leaders. He knew it. And he did it anyway. Why? Why does he not avoid? Because couldn't he, if he had played his cards right, couldn't Jesus have had a longer ministry than 3 years? I mean, if he didn't raise Lazarus from the dead, if he doesn't say some of the things that he says to some of the religious experts and make them look foolish like he did every time, if he just kind of got along a little bit better, wouldn't he be able to continue his teaching longer than 3 years? So why does Jesus not avoid these things? That wasn't God's plan. He was always the obedient son. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Jesus doesn't play it safe. He's going to accomplish God's will. Doesn't matter if he could have had a long career teaching and preaching. That's not why he came. He was going to accomplish what God sent him here to accomplish. And he didn't play it safe. And he didn't back down from the bullies. And he didn't play ball with the religious experts. That's not what Jesus was about. And so because of that, he doesn't avoid these types of things. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that would be a big problem with the religious leaders, and it was. Like Andy said in the video, I mean, as soon as he raised Lazarus from the dead, as Andy refers to, he points us to John 11. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. That was it. That was the final straw. Yes, I believe that's yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Yeah, watch me raise this man from the dead. And later on, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to die, and in 3 days, come back to life. And maybe, just maybe, you'll believe me when I tell you that. Yeah. Right. Right. We're back to the will of God again, God's will. Yeah. Yeah. And that is true. That was Jesus. Jesus was always trying to point to God, to the Heavenly Father. You know, this is my Father's will. Yeah. The other thing, one of the last things that Andy talks about in the video, and this will be kind of get us into our last topic for tonight, but Andy says toward the end, he says there's a little Caiaphas in all of us. Ouch. There's a little Caiaphas in all of us. I don't like that statement at all, but it's true. You know, it's true. Because whatever is in the center of our life is the thing that has replaced God. And that's what he means by there's a little Caiaphas in all of us. Whatever is in the center of our life is the thing that has replaced God. So what are you don't have to answer out loud, but think about this to yourself. What are you currently trying to preserve that you need to surrender to God? Because Lent is the perfect season to do that. What are you currently trying to preserve that you need to surrender to God? What is the one thing that you can do this week to let that thing go, whatever that thing is? What is the one thing you can do that you can let go? As Andy says, whatever is in the center of your life is the thing that has replaced God. Whatever is in the center. So that may be a position at work, or a grade point average, or an unhealthy relationship, or money, or power, or sex, or whatever. Whatever is in the center of your life is the thing. Whatever that little voice inside that is desperate to preserve is standing between you and God. That's the obstacle. Whatever that is an obstacle between you and God. And so the point of Lent, really the point of our faith journey, but especially during Lent, the point is to try to remove that obstacle, whatever that is, whatever that thing is in the center, whatever that unhealthy relationship or habit or person or activity or whatever, or if it's our position at work or power or whatever, that is what we're trying to remove, because that is always less than God. Always less than God. So don't let something that doesn't even matter, something of this world that doesn't even matter, take the place of God. Don't let that become a little God with a little g. Don't let that become a little g God in your life, because the little gods of this world will always disappoint you. But our God, capital G, God, never disappoints. God has a plan for your life. And Andy not only talks about there's a little Caiaphas in all of us, but he talks about the need to surrender whatever it is we're trying to preserve. You know, whatever it is that we think so important. You know, he talked about that bad relationship, that relationship with someone who maybe was toxic or negative in your life. And he said, that person's not even in your life anymore, but you're holding on to something. You're holding on to some kind of baggage from that relationship or grudge or whatever. And yet that person's not even in your life. And so, we have to find a way to get rid of that. We have to find a way to get that obstacle out of the way so that we can be more connected to God. So what is it that you're trying to preserve that you need to surrender to God? This is what I want you to think about as you leave tonight, as you go about your daily routine for the next week. What are you trying to preserve that you need to surrender to God? What's the little God in your life that is demanding more and more and providing less and less? Because saying yes to God, as we said earlier, saying yes to God will cost you something. But saying no to God will cost you more, including whatever you replace God with. So that's what I'd like for us to think about this week. Think about Caiaphas and think about what is it that is in the center of your life that has replaced God, and what are you going to do about it? How can you work? How can you take a step toward removing whatever that is. Any closing thoughts? I'm going to have a prayer with us before we go, but I did a lot of talking there for the last few minutes. So any thoughts, anything that pops into your head over the last few minutes or from the video? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's Andy's funny way of Jesus Josephson, like because it was son of Joseph. In other words, Jesus, the son of Joseph, Jesus, Joseph's son. Yeah, that was a little bit of Andy's humor. Yeah. I'll be honest, the first time I saw that video, I was like, wait, what? I had to rewind it. Like, who is Jesus Josephson? Who is that part? Oh, okay. I had to hit the rewind button there. Yeah.
It occurred to me when he was describing Caiaphas and the way that, he was trying to talk him into, well, let's just get rid of Jesus, kill him, that'll fix the problem.
Right.
So I think some of us may be struggling to figure out what that thing is that we need to figure out, that we need to get rid of, to open up our channels more, or whatever,
Right.
however you want to put it.
Yeah.
But I think if we are justifying and making a logical argument that it's the right thing, that we have to hold on to it. Human beings are great at justifying bad or wrong or stupid behavior. And so if we're struggling to go, oh, well, I don't think I'm worshiping my job, but I might. But if you're justifying something, you might go back and revisit this, because that's how Caiaphas is doing it. Hey, look, guys, we don't agree on everything, but look at this. This is the logical path that makes perfect sense.
Makes perfect sense. Right.
And it'll fix it.
It'll be great for the nation. Not for me, not for us. Oh, no. It's about the nation. Yeah, we can justify all kinds of things. Yeah, that's right. No, that's good. Thank you for adding that. Yeah. Very, very true. And we are good as human beings, we are good at justifying things. And so, yes, because of that, it does make it sometimes hard to figure out what is that thing that we have replaced God with. So that's part of the challenge. All right, well, thank you all for being here. Thank you all at home for joining us on the live stream. Next week, we're looking at Judas Iscariot. That'll be the second person. That'll be a fun one, right? Let's close in a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, Lord. I thank you so much for our time to gather and study and listening to Andy and his perspective. God, we ask for your blessings to be upon us as this in this coming week, as we look at what is it that is replacing you? What is in the center of our lives, God? We do recognize that there's a little Caiaphas in all of us. And so, God, we thank you for the challenge that you have laid before us. And we will strive in our daily lives and in our prayer life this week to try to identify whatever it is that is keeping us from a closer relationship with you and your Son, Jesus. Send us forth now and keep us safe. Pour out your blessings upon us in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Good night. Thank you. Hey.